Gordon Burns has joined us up here.
Good morning. It's great to be here. We're so fortunate to have Karen Ross as our Secretary for Agriculture, but I hate following her as a speaker. I was asked to give an overview of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and I'm going to do a non-technical overview. I know there are some panels that follow me that will be able to go into a lot more of the details, but what I'm going to try to do is sort of hit the highlights of the background leading up to the Act, the historical approach to managing groundwater in California, the Act itself, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, as it's affectionately called, and then put it in a little context at the end. So in California, we have some particular hydrologic challenges. One of them is geographic and hydrological, which is that we get our precipitation at the wrong place at the wrong time. We get most of it in the north, in the mountains, and most of the demand is in the south in the summertime. Also, we have a lot of annual variability. This is a terrific map that shows the variability nationwide of precipitation. The black, blue, and green dots are represents the most variable precipitation annually. The pink and yellow is the least. You can see it's kind of focused a lot on California. We have very variable precipitation. So we have this extraordinary series of water projects to store and convey water to get it where we need it, when we need it. That's been built up over the last century or so. And I'm sure you can recognize some of them. In yellow, it's the local, green are the local projects, yellow are the federal projects, and red are the state projects. So you see this is the Los Angeles Aqueduct coming down from Mona Lake in the Owens Valley, Colorado. This is the East Bay, Hetch Hetchy. I can't see the colors from here very well, but anyway, hope I got this right? I do actually know them. On average, statewide, groundwater is about 35 to 65% of the supply, depending on surface water supplies. And as Secretary Ross said, in some communities, it's 100%. At the time that we were really contemplating going forward with groundwater management, we were also in the midst of a drought. And we had record low groundwater levels throughout the state. This is a map that the black dots represent historic places where there was historic lows in groundwater levels measured from about 1900 to 2014. We also have had tremendous population growth, which isn't going to stop anytime soon. We're at about 38 million people now. Notably, most of our major water infrastructure was built for a different population at a different time, and of course, also, as we'll talk about, for a different hydrology. We've not necessarily housed that population in the best way from a water policy standpoint. This is a terrific picture from the New York Times last year showing some housing in the desert. That's desert on the right-hand side of the slide, and just over the backyard fences are swimming pools and lawns. We've also had extraordinary changes in agricultural demand. This is a slide from 1946. This is a UC Davis slide, actually. The green color is native vegetation. And you can see also what should be, I can't see it from here, but some orange is citrus, the purple is vineyard, and then you don't see much pink, but pink would be nut and fruit deciduous crops. In 2010, the picture had really changed. Much less of the native vegetation, much more of the permanent crops. So flip through it again. And we don't, like with housing, we don't always put our agriculture exactly where we should from a water policy standpoint. But having said that, we shouldn't blame farmers for doing this. This is an area of rangeland that was cleared, and they're putting in permanent crops there, formerly unirrigated. But this isn't really the farmers' fault, right? The farmers are following the rules, and they are making rational decisions. The problem is that in the absence of somebody minding the store and paying attention to the common resource, we have a classic tragedy of the commons, where the sum total of all these rational decisions depletes the resource. In terms of future challenges, we have, in addition to population growth, we have climate change. And in California, there's some really interesting work out of Stanford. The problem isn't necessarily that we're getting less precipitation. We get about the same amount of precipitation, although it comes in different forms. But the problem is more about temperature. And with the climb in temperature, that tends to decrease our snowpack and increase our demand. And so from just a couple of decades ago, the chances of us having drought conditions in dry years has essentially doubled. This is a picture from a year ago, April, of an area in the Sierra where they take the end of the year snow surveys, one of the places where they take the snow surveys. And in an average year, there would be about 5 feet of snow here. Last year, of course, there was just no snowpack at all. And so this is where Governor Brown set up a press conference to announce some additional emergency drought measures. Our historical approach to groundwater is pretty extraordinary, considering how important it is to California. This is it. We had no real effective statewide approach. This is option one. Actually, there is a second option. It's the lawyers. You call in the lawyers, and they sue everybody in the basin, and then about 20 years later, they negotiate a basin management plan. And there are about 515 groundwater basins, according to the Department of Water Resources in California. There are about 30 that have been adjudicated through this judicial process, mostly in Southern California. And, you know, although it was a painful process with high transaction costs and not the ideal way to go about getting a groundwater management plan, those basins, for the most part, have done pretty well through the drought and are, I think, glad that they went through all that pain some time ago. So now we do have the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It covers the most important basins, 127 of them. It relies primarily on local agencies to draft plans to manage the basins. It requires them to get to sustainable groundwater management in a 20-year timeline. We'll talk about that in a moment. And if they don't have adequate plans, which they need to show to the state agencies for evaluation, or if they don't make adequate progress towards sustainability in 20 years, then the state can intervene and impose its own plan. This is in part to help the locals get over their own local conflicts about how to manage groundwater. We know, of course, that this is a very contentious issue, but the one thing that the locals hate more than perhaps change and each other is the state. The Act defines sustainable groundwater management as the management and use of groundwater in a manner that can be maintained during the planning and implementation horizon without causing undesirable results. Now, all those terms are loaded and they're defined, but the point is that we understand, and the Act recognizes that groundwater goes up and down. It varies, but over time, over a 50-year planning horizon, it should more or less balance out, and you should manage it in a way that avoids bad things happening from overpumping it. And this is the list of bad things. And the undesirable results that these plans are supposed to avoid are substantial and unreasonable lowering of groundwater levels, reductions in groundwater storage, seawater intrusion, land subsidence, and surface water depletions. So it's really an impacts test, right? You need to manage to avoid these impacts in the long term. Some key concepts from a policymaker standpoint about the legislation. Those 127 basins represent 92% of groundwater use and 88% of the population, so we really got most of it. The idea of local control and empowerment is very important. It gives sweeping authority to local agencies to regulate groundwater, and it does allow them to tailor their plans to their local needs and resources. And importantly, financing is a big issue here. A lot of the financing is going to have to come from locals. They need to be able to build consensus about what they want to pay for and what they're willing to do in the way of projects as opposed to demand management and other strategies. So it'll be different in each area. It wouldn't be nearly as effective if we tried to do all of this from Sacramento. The state does, though, impose uniform standards both through the statute itself and through regulations that the Department of Water Resources is putting out. I'm sure you'll hear more about that later. The state enforcement comes through the State Water Resources Quality Control Board, which can intervene under defined circumstances. And then the timeline, 20 years sounds like a long time, but when you think about the time that it takes to really to get consensus around projects, to plan them, to raise the financing for them, to construct them, and also to make the adjustments. In some communities where they will have to do quite a bit of demand management, they may want to develop groundwater markets like a lot of the adjudications have, but they also need time to make those adjustments, and we don't want to go from 60 to 40 miles per hour in a short time period with the jolting effect that that has on the communities. This is the timeline. The DWR's regulations for the plan contents and the way that they will evaluate the plans just came out recently. And next step for the department is best management practices. In June 2017, not too long from now, local agencies need to have figured out how to organize themselves and formed governance that covers the entire basin. No basins are allowed to have unmanaged areas. If they do, then the state can intervene. And then they need to submit their plans either in 5 years or in 7 years, depending on whether or not they are currently designated as in long-term overdraft. And then they have 20 years from that date to actually achieve sustainability. Just some context at the end. Although this is landmark legislation and incredibly important, it really is just one piece of the puzzle. And Glenda referred earlier to the California Water Action Plan. We in the administration view water as a series of interrelated problems and interrelated solutions that we need to think about and approach from a coherent standpoint across agencies and across topics, because you can't really solve one problem without affecting another, and you want to, of course, use your resources wisely too. So the California Water Action Plan is sort of our blueprint or our agenda for approaching that sort of coherent path to sustainability. It doesn't necessarily get us all the way there, but as far as our administration goes, this is the start to try to get us on the right track. Groundwater was an important milestone, but we're trying to make improvements in all of these areas. And I just want to say that, to close, that California, especially considering how important groundwater is, has been incredibly irresponsible over its first 165 years in not really trying to regulate it and allowing ourselves to really get in a pretty deep hole. But we've shown also the ability over time to pull off big things, and I think SIGNA itself is a testament to the fact that California can still make major policy adjustments, and we're finally behaving responsibly and stepping up to the plate. It'll be very hard, and it's going to be something that will have to evolve. I'm sure there will be a lot of conflict in the years ahead, but I firmly believe that 20 years from now, our biggest regret is going to be that we didn't start sooner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon. I think you're correct that starting sooner would have been very helpful. I have to admit, when I first moved to California from Colorado, I was kind of shocked that there was virtually no groundwater regulation. In Colorado and many of the western states, it is very strictly regulated and has been for over 100 years. So it is good to see California jumping on that.